All right. Well, thank you all for joining in person or online or over the phone. I'm very thankful that Joe Krienert joined our group at the North Central Climate Science Center headquarters in Fort Collins this summer as a National Association of Geoscience Teachers U.S. Geological Survey Cooperative Summer Field Training Program intern. So I read out all those letters. This is a program that's been in USGS for many years now, but biology has only been included since 2009. And it's an excellent opportunity to work with students who are at the top of their undergraduate class in geology. They're selected by their field course instructors and recommended from across the country to USGS. And I had the pleasure of Joe selecting or indicating interest in our project on phenology with the Climate Science Center. And then we interviewed, and he accepted our internship position. So I'm incredibly thankful for that, and to Brian and Jeff for hosting him in Fort Collins. He's going to talk today about his great achievement of his primary objective, which was looking at what do the phenocams that we've been deploying with AmericaView, what do they see on the ground so that we can coordinate and correlate the phenocam views with remotely sensed phenology data. And because he met his objective relatively quickly, although it took a significant amount of work, he also went on to explore a little bit of greenness indice analyses. So he'll give an overview of that preliminary work. He's worked a little bit with the 2 AmericaView student interns as well this summer. He's gotten to do some travel, and he will show us some excellent photographs from his time in the field for work and on his own. And so again, just thank you, everyone. We are recording this, so you can view it later or show it to other people that might be interested. So I hope I haven't missed anything. Joe, thank you, and really looking forward to getting to keep you on a few more days even after you finish up here in Fort Collins. So thanks again.
And I'll just add my thanks to Jeff Morrison at the Climate Science Center. To say, Geneva did a lot of the legwork to get the position in place, and Joe is just exceeded our expectations. I see the people on the call, some interesting Committee on Earth Observing Satellite folks with Miguel and the AmericaView program. So I think Joe has an enjoyable presentation with some incredible pictures of some of the trips out and about, but in some ways we're hoping this sets the stage for some additional work that we can do with AmericaView, with USGS, with phenocams in terms of validation or comparing to satellite data. So I think Joe's ready to go. So we don't have dual screens, so we just got to go with the, I think.
And we can't wire him to that monitor?
We
share
could.
I don't know how hard it is.
We'd have to disconnect. We can. So we're having a little technical question here. We could try it. You got a?
Do you have an HDMI?
Yeah, I do.
We're gonna do this on the fly, and I always say that this is easier than you guys all flying to Fort Collins. So we'll kind of just say, bear with us for a minute or two. I think the WebEx should still be going. Maybe monitor that.
That should be fine.
Yep, that's looking good. There.
And now you should be able to extend or start with the slide. Yeah, it's still going.
But I do still see yours.
So you want to maybe share that screen? If you could switch the screen.
Yeah,
not on there, on the actual WebEx.
Well, extend, I think it is extended.
Yeah, so we're extended, but then if you go up to that, will it allow you to switch to monitor 2? Okay, now you're sharing that.
Yep,
so
I see that.
If you do now, you can do your F5. Is it F5? Maybe I've got the wrong time.
Yesterday we just plugged it into right. F5.
Okay, I think we're good.
Yeah, you're right.
We'll turn it over to Joe after that.
rough start to a smooth go. All right, thank you everybody for coming to listen in on the great experience that I've had this summer, taking part in the USGS and a GT summer internship. I kind of gave myself the presentation, little title, and working amongst the rich diversity of the north central U.S. So to start things off, there was no delay or lag at all. May 16th, my day of graduation in Jackson County from Southern Illinois University, and I immediately took flight and arrived in Fort Collins in approximately a day and a half. And one might say I got in sync with things. An old house, kind of a early 1900s house in town that was moved from foundation to another location, is actually a hostel, and I ended up staying there for 2 weeks and getting a really good essence of the community in Fort Collins. So it was a great way to start this summer's adventures. And right thereafter, back-to-back conferences. There was good cause in getting out here so quick. Being at this field is a little bit different than the hydrogeology and groundwater studies that I'm used to. Getting to see these two conferences start the summer off was a perfect beginning to the internship in the sense of really immersing me with knowledge of so many wise people here coming together at the Open Science Conference hosted by the North Central Climate Science Center here at CSU. And it was just a really great opportunity to full holds barred, get to know some people, communicate, make connections, and start to get a knowledge of the science at hand. And I say back to back because right thereafter, there was another conference held between the Climate Science Center, the USDA Hub, and the Western Water Assessment at the Pawnee Prairie Research Station here near Fort Collins, about an hour east. And it was a North Central region retreat of sorts where discussions on climate science and water resources and agriculture and all things considered in that regard were shared, and just a really beneficial chance, again, to get amidst people who are experts in their field, willing to share their information, communicate, and especially the scene, the natural scenery that surrounded really was conducive for good communication between everyone. A very serene prairie land environment. Never having been to a prairie before, it was a great experience. And followed up awesomely with a tour of a National Science Foundation funded National Ecologic Observation Network site there. You see on the right-hand side, which is a pretty sizable outpost, 3 or 4 stories tall, and a plethora of measurement tools on it. Just an amazing piece of equipment to have in the field and get to see and take a tour of. Also known as a NEON site. And from what I understand, there's several of those throughout the country. So it's a really cool integration of research and getting to be a part and take a tour of it.
And they will have phenocams. This one doesn't yet, but all the NEON sites are starting. Yeah.
That's news. That's awesome. I didn't know that. Cool. So one more cherry on top of the sundae. Okay. So my entrance to the area with the awesome scenery was also had with wonderful fauna. These two little critters I saw frequently actually on my travels through town. This wild turkey I often saw on a sidewalk route that I used to bicycle to work from my apartment. And I've never had a wild turkey come up to me and peck at my tire, let alone get within 20 yards. So that was an awesome experience. No tags or anything, so it was definitely wild on it. And then many lunches here. It was quiet with everyone's busy summer travels and on-site conference work. But I always had a nice little guy hanging around to have lunch with. So that was a sweet benefit to the summer. And so getting right into the workplace, this office has been a catalyst for epic learning on my scale. It's almost like university studies here, exponential, mainly because of the workspace provided by the people that were here in an in-and-out situation. So beginning and starting, Jeff Morstead, Brian Miller, and I took an afternoon after the conferences it had and things began to settle, discussing what my fundamental focuses would be, or goals for the summer. And it kind of summarized into about 4 distinct points. The first one being discovering a means of automating the creation of a field of view footprint exhibited by the phenocam network, as such as a polygon shapefile. So looking to create a tool plugin that would allow looking at a camera, getting a superficial area or plan view map aspect of what the phenocam is actually seeing in the field. The second point was preliminary analysis of what data sources, remotely sensed data sources, are in proximity to that field of view footprint. So it's kind of a tiered interest here. So getting number 1 point successful is priority to move forward. But the second aspect was starting to look at the analyses with respect to that footprint and some of the remotely sensed data sources, for example, MODIS and some of the Landsat satellites. And the third point was to begin the compilation of ground control points, or GCPs, for correlating the phenocamera images physically in the real-world coordinate systems of GIS software map space. And the intent for that is to be able to provide a relay of information between the photographs, information that's contained in the photographs, to be able to be applicable to the maps, and then also information that might be in map space, reversed as such on a two-way street, be applicable onto the image. And the fourth point is kind of an overall icing on the cake, so to speak, was providing tutorial guides for the phenocam programming, the modem programming, the ground control point recording just discussed, and some of the data processing scripts discussed regarding the creation of the footprint for the phenocams. So a well-rounded 4 points of getting an understanding of where the phenocameras have visibility, analyzing some of that visibility preliminarily, getting ground control points to spatially orientate those footprints with maps, and then documenting all that and making the documents accessible in the future, pending some edits here in the forthcoming weeks, and making them accessible on the Phenocam Network site. So now that I got nested into the workplace a little bit with a foray of all the amazing individuals and information at the conferences and that first start, it's always good to start a job and know what you have to do. And that meeting with Jeff Morset and Brian Miller really set that home. So now that things were nested, I went ahead and took my first weekend off, and got up to Horsetooth Park, which is just west of Fort Collins. And it is truly a beautiful place to have right in the backyard, literally, less 7 to 10 miles away, seemingly. A magnificent place, waterfalls, beautiful peaks overlooking. You can see Rocky Mountain National Park there from the bottom right-hand corner, and the silhouette of the park's namesake, the Horsetooth there. But just a beautiful place, and another example of the fauna. Those deers were kind enough to let me get within 5 or 6 paces without rustling a fuss, so it's a very beautiful place to have right here near town. And a little more hiking around. The geologist in me was giddy when I got to go to Red Mountain, the inlands north of Fort Collins, give or take 45 minutes. A beautiful bend fold in some lithology here. And one of the trails, the Cherokee Trail, sweeps north around the whole area and gives you a great aspect of it. Hard to discern from that top image, but that bend in the lower image is exhibited by that yellow and reddish space on the right-hand hillside in the top image that cuts across the terrain, otherwise else being eroded out through weathering over all these years. Another site, jam-packed the weekends. Work hard, play hard is the logic here. This is Grey Rock Mountain, and it is an amazing, seemingly micro ecosystem. Don't quote me on that, but it felt like it as such when you're up at, a mountain peak. And I haven't seen mountains that much in my life before, but to be atop a mountain peak with exposed rock surfaces and alpinish trees, and then have schools of frogs playing in harmony at sunrise, truly felt like a very unique, self-contained ecosystem. It was a really great trail, really great part of some of the scenery that's around the area. And one little foray more before the work got gritty, and the same kind of grit here had. It looked to be 4 individuals passed away in a B17, which is a large-scale bomber during World War II up near Crown Point, a training exercise. And because of the location's remoteness, The site was inaccessible enough to remove the debris, and it's kind of become a standing memorial, as I would assume. And it was a very sombering place to see amidst the beauty of the terrain, a very interesting contrast. So, field site work. You might look at this and say, field site work, what are you talking about? That's some beautiful petroglyphs. Indeed it is, very beautiful petroglyphs. But I couldn't pass up a chance to see some petroglyphs that are actually carved into stone, whereas where I'm from, most of them are just ochre paintings on rock surfaces that are well preserved. But this was truly an interesting view. And it was en route to the Quickbird phenocam site near Rock Springs, or a bit north of Rock Springs in Wyoming. This is the White Mountain petroglyph. It's in the Flaming Gorge region, and in that same gorge is this, again, the geologist in me is a giddy, a beautiful volcanic neck with olivine phenocrysts amid this basalt, bigger than the size of my head, bigger than I've ever seen in these samples or photos. It's just an amazing landform. And again, the wildlife out here makes itself persistent. Prairie falcon watched over me as I precariously moved up the scree field and got a great vista of the Flaming Gorge and some of the Kilpecker sand dunes up there to the northeast. And so camp the night thereafter, and then go ahead and head towards the site where we went and did some maintenance on the Quickbird site, and we'll get to that a little bit more later on in the presentation. But there's a pilot butte north of Rock Springs and a large area of land that's dedicated to, for the most part, wild range of horses that move through there. And if you get up early enough, so they say, by the advice of Geneva Chong, you might get a chance to see them, and I was lucky enough to indeed see that. There's about 20 of them moving along the roadside, and slowly moved inland as I pulled by slowly and carefully and got a good view through a binocular in a makeshift monocular setup, but it was a really great chance to see some of the wildlife once again. All right, without further ado, back to work. Okay, so here we are finally at the Tetons after doing some of the work in Rock Springs and at the Quickbird site. Fortunately, care of Diane Dubinsky and some of her interns, the site had preliminarily been set up, so most of the work we were going to be doing was electrical. So it was fairly expedited, and it was a great go of things. They had pre-set the hole and mounted it in concrete for the post to support the solar panel and the camera itself. And this is the first day once we got to the site, kind of doing a quick survey before we jumped right in. And so we got the solar mount ready, brought the clinometer, and Diane Dubinsky and Daniel Garanis took the time to measure the proper declination of the solar panel setup so that it gets optimal solar intake to keep that battery full and charged and the phenocamera running as optimally as possible. And so they are assembling it, and we got it mounted pretty quick in the morning hours. And Audrey McComb here and Tony Petrosky working to help finalize some of the aspects to get a lightning rod set up. She's cutting off to hook into the electrical system, and there I am running a little bit of conduit with the help of Audrey, and just getting things set high and tight so that it's good and assembled. And some final electrical connections here. Diane Dubinsky giving kind of a survey oversight of making things sure are right. And I have to say the conversation and community on just this short field site work was great. You know you're in good company when work feels like play, and this was an extreme instance of that. And one last great parting shot of the group as we were working, caught by a visitor Diane had brought to the site. And you know there's ecologists in the field when even steel rebar shavings are caught with a trash bag at the base of a lightning rod. There's a concern for the environment here, and it's exposed right there.
You're eating something?
That's a file to clean the edge of the lightning rod so that people don't get cuts.
Stored in your mouth, evidently.
Somewhere. Pockets were full with other tools. But yeah, that was great, and it was very exciting to see something like this come to fruition. I had gotten a little bit of dialogue from Geneva at the beginning of the summer when I found out I was going to be working out here, and jumped right into the phenocam website and started looking at some of the imagery and getting interested and excited. But to actually take part in nearly the full install from start to finish was a really amazing experience, and something I'm able to reference back to by care of recently we shipped the modem out to the site, and pending a little bit of battery fix-up that happened in the last couple of days, thanks to Daniel in Geneva. It's now outputting live images for analysis and record-keeping purposes. And being in that scenery wouldn't be right to go without seeing some of the other sites in the area. So Daniel was kind enough to give me a tour guide of sorts up to a place the locals call Sleeping Indian Mountain, which the USGS elevation marker at the peak is dictated as sheep, so call it what you will. It's a beautiful place, and at sunrise we left. Perfect timing too. Wildflowers were just coming on, and the whole route, species, various, all over, this magnificent, magnificent path. And there's from the summit, Daniel and I taking a look out towards the Wind River Range in the background, and then also in the upper left, you can see the Tetons there gleaming high. And seeing those Tetons gleaming high, I couldn't hold myself back. I meandered there the very next morning after a long day of hiking with Daniel, moonset and Tiwanaut, woke the day, idol and worshiper there on the right-hand side, and then near the summit there, precariously, I stopped for a moment to take a good picture of Ginny Lake and the surrounding region. That is a very beautiful hike, and I suggest if you have the guts and the heart, it's highly recommended if you're ever in the Tetons. Even walking around Ginny Lake is beautiful. That whole area is an amazing piece of the North American continent. So I had a couple days off and moved with the speed of a peregrine through the Wind River Range north, all the way up to the fundamental group of people that helped get me here this summer. YBRA is a geologic training camp up near Red Lodge in Wyoming, or in Montana, just on the border of Wyoming. And you can see in the picture on the right there is some of the staff members that I was blessed enough with getting to know last summer. And they helped be part of the group of people that voiced the advocacy for me to get nominated to try and get out for this internship this summer. And I couldn't go the summer through without being so close to them and not giving them a 30-minute handshake and then back on the road. On the way back down to Fort Collins, I stopped through the Bighorn Mountains and saw the medicine wheel up there, and that view up there is quite amazing. It's just a beautifully epic sight of the valley towards the Beartooth Range, and just it's a very beautiful mountain range up there through that route. And I hadn't even realized it was the 4th of July on the way back until the kindness of whoever reserved my hotel room pointed it right in the direction of where they were shown. So I quick ran out of the hotel room after I snapped the picture and saw the remaining of the show. And that was the end of that foray travel. But on the way back to Fort Collins, that crashed B17 Bomber I had mentioned earlier was repaired in some regard. There's a group of nostalgic folks who try and keep history alive, and they've restored this B17 Bomber. It runs and flies, and if you get there and it's not crowded enough, they'll let you walk up inside the cockpit. So that was a nice sombering moment to the sites of earlier in my travels here. Again, back to work. Okay, so in preparation for the EROS Council, where Jeff was going to be meeting and presenting some information, he requested that I prepare a couple slides about some of the work that I was taking part in. So here's a slide depicting the phenocam network, and in particular a zoom in on the north central region, focusing on active and pending phenocamera sites. And I actually, right before this presentation, realized that when I made this slide, two of them, in particular, the Grand Teton site was still orange, but I went in and edited the image to adequately depict that it is now active. So that's another green light, things ago. But it's really interesting to see how many of these actually have coverage over the U.S., and there's several more over the entire nation. If you notice, there's one in Hawaii and some in Alaska as well. And it's a great aspect to explore on the phenocam website. One of the other images, and kind of objective one, was creating the footprint that I had mentioned earlier. And here's an example of that footprint by using some software well known through GIS to basically get a visibility centered off DEM elevation data and physical position of the camera, things like azimuth and declination and field of view. And putting all that information into this plugin allows the output of superficial regions where you're actually seeing ground contact. And so we look to begin the data analysis aspect after objective one success of actually creating the footprint, in that bringing in some of the native projections of these remotely sensed data and overlap them on this footprint and really look at the proximal context. What kind of overlap do we have between this footprint and the pixel values, or the pixels that are in these remotely sensed data sets? And so to go a little further in there to make a more and more correlation between the footprint analyses. On the right there, you can see the three distinct regions that are separated. And they're separated because on the left-hand side here, you can see an actual phenocam image that's been highlighted to make the distinction of these regions of topography where loss of sight happens behind a hillside. And so to take this overlay of grid space data and the regions of interest depicted by the footprint, beginning a little bit of preliminary analysis of some of the data that was available through MODIS, Landsat 7 data sources, and Landsat 8 data sources. A rough equation was come up, and it looks complex, and it kind of is, but it's actually pretty simple. On the left-hand side, where it says basic equation, it's more or less taking that value TXP, is saying how many pixels does the region of interest touch, and that becomes your summation quantity. So on the right-hand side is an example of working with Landsat 8 data where we have 6 pixels that actually touch the region of interest. And we expand that equation out as such that you're looking at an area of context where the focus or the center that you're weighting your average values on is based on the region of interest. So how much of the region of interest does each pixel withhold? And then taking the value of that pixel based off of that quantity or percentage, and then combining those all for a total region of interest phenological index value. And so if you run through the calculation for this particular site that I did by hand, it's much quicker on a computer. It's pretty amazing. But if you do it by hand, it comes out to be about 0.07 for mid-June, which is reasonably appropriate for a greening area, and especially in this first region of interest that is, of the 3 regions of interest in this image, predominantly vegetated with some sagebrush and some grasses, and this time of the year, the image actually shows it as being quite green. So using that same average technique, going through the spread of MODIS, Landsat 7, and Landsat 8 data sets, pre-calculated batches of data were obtained after spending many hours thoughtfully trying to calculate them by hand from raw band values, thanks to the advice of a link from Colin Talbert here, an employee at the USGS and also works at the Climate Science Center, but much more easily had when all the corrections for atmospheric aberrations and various other factors that might skew the data. And they're pre-made values, phenologic values, and so depicted, averaged based off of that former image with the calculations on the previous slide and plotted out, and intended to be plotted against this, which is a spread of May 2014 to June-ish 2015 from the phenologic camera itself. And 90th day percentiles were based on the values, and then from that 90th day percentile, those were condensed into a daily average and then plotted on this graph here. And although the NDVI and SAVI trends here, or the profiles exhibited, are somewhat anomalous in that you would expect, or I would expect, being quite a novice phenologic studies student coming from geology, but I would expect, based off of my research, for them to be positive values during green season and during the winter being negative values. But for some reason, for sake of things, even through boring through the data as much as I could, the only way to appropriate a more tight fit of positive versus negative for green versus dead or dormant would be to add a -1 coefficient. And so I felt more comfortable leaving things as raw and in their natural state as far as data coming in was possible. But the nice thing is, one aspect did follow a particular trend that seemed to make sense. And the GCC Index, which is a greenness index that the phenocam network plugin tool provides reliably, matches sort of the trend that's made by the EVI calculations from the camera. The EVI calculations seem to accentuate the changes in that trend in the GCC plot, but more or less it follows the same general trend through a seasonal arc. So with that regard, it was interesting to me or intriguing to me to go into the data analysis a little bit more, not too much on the numbers sake of things, but just looking at positions of these arcs and especially with respect to some of the remotely sensed data. So that kind of gets into a situation where objective 2 of doing some minor comparisons of satellite data with the phenocam visual data comes into play, and it felt to me it was a successful stance of getting this data in, taking a look at it, and in the next slide you'll see actually getting more of like a first-hand account or accordance of what's really depicted here. But these are all the EVI based off of that being the only phenological index from the camera. It was also shared by the MODIS, Landsat 7, and Landsat 8 data sets that resembled a similar trend. So the main thing I was looking at in this image was the duration over time rather than, you know, the necessary y-axis value, but looking at how the points plotted out over time. And one noticeable thing is the stagger, almost a month stagger of a general waveform of the moving average of the phenocam versus that of the MODIS that I thought was pretty interesting. But even more interesting is going in this same graph plot, kind of fine resolution there, but the images that are come forth here will have a little bit more clearer dates. And going through and looking at the actual images that were referenced for that calculation and seeing, so here's June 26th of 2014, maybe a little bit after green up, depending on the seasons here, kind of like in a higher stage of when plants are at a peak, so to speak, and you kind of get a depiction of what's going on in the visible and the near infrared, which is both those bands are incorporated into all these phenologic index calculations. So it's getting an appropriation of what's going on between those two seems really important here. And then here we're looking at September 21st, 2014, and it's sort of similar. The color stages look a little bit blander, and there's almost, you can almost distinctly tell that there's an exposure change. And making some connections or looking at observations of those changes, but also looking at the value change. We have a higher greenness index, whereas the first set of images almost looks like it has more green, but in reality, these calculations, as far as I have come to understand, are more about a relationship between near infrared and visible rather than just solely looking at the visible quantity of greenness. And here's one of the darkest stages of winter there, one of the very low data points, and it really kind of encompasses all the things that are takeaways from seeing anything. You've got snow cover, high reflectance, you've got a shadow. This image is kind of, to me, the exposure value was quite high, so that might be skewing data a little bit in the calculations. And then moving forward a bit into early spring again, here we're looking at March, and we get a mix of things. We get some snow on the ground, and then we also have some plants that are maybe waking up, getting a little bit of greenness active, plant growth, and we get a value up high already. So it's really interesting to see what kind of correlations might be had. Maybe there's a relationship between some of the snow ground cover and the soil exposure up in the upper left-hand corner of June 26th comparatively, because their values, their EVI values on the plot are nearly the same. So looking at what kind of visual aspects of the image that might contribute to that is interesting, was quite interesting to me. And then one final look that was recommended yesterday by Geneva Chong, looking at this high data point at the end of the data set that I had, which is almost the same date, a year past, of the first image set that I have on the left-hand side. And they look eerily the same, slightly higher value in exposure on the left-hand image, but seemingly substantially value higher as far as the phenologic index goes. But more or less, the idea was to not necessarily critique the values and see what they mean, but more just get a depiction of what's going on with the phenocamera in a relationship with this seasonal arc trend of plant senescence. So a bit more travels, why not? Yes, wouldn't be right to come this far out and not go to Rocky Mountain National Park. So I ran out there quite early, and surprisingly enough, Fort Collins is extremely close to Rocky Mountain National Park. Another blessing you guys have right in your backyard. Very beautiful. Took a hike up Steppen, Chiquita, Epsilon, and Fairchild. Maybe a little bit more to bite off than I could normally chew, but this fellow here in the left-hand bottom corner, only person I saw all day, bumped into me on top of Epsilon as I was taking a break and drinking some water and said, "Let's do Fairchild, man." And I was like, "I don't know you, but okay." I might only be out here once, so let's do it. And it was a great alternative. It was a great opportunity. And he wasn't the only other fauna I saw up on that peak summit. There was a friendly little marmot who came up and sniffed my boot and was pretty interested in the avocado I had. But you know how that goes. No share food in the national park. So he hung out for a while, but as soon as this fellow Steve walked up and we did Fairchild, the marmot was gone and done. And then at the end of the day, just as we were deciding to come off Fairchild, a storm blew in. And if you know about hiking in the mountains, which I don't know enough of at that point, it's a good idea to get down as quick as possible for lightning exposure. So it's really amazing how fast you can run down a mountain when rain's bearing down on you. I don't think I've ever ran that fast in my life in a more beautiful place. I took another opportunity, and I found it curious that I'm from Jackson County, and the county next door is Jackson, so let's go see what's going on over in Jackson County here. A beautiful old silver mine town site called Teller City, and it almost felt as though I was in a wormhole there on the left, which was actually a failed silver mine that ended up being the town's well. But there's also an Illinois River moving through that county nearby the town, so I took some time to hike through there and kind of go through a wormhole nexus of the universe, be in two places at once. Very beautiful site and very beautiful historical maintenance there by the State Park Service to keep that available to see. Again, geologist in me roaring to see what could be had. A rift valley in New Mexico. Never having been to New Mexico, I took the opportunity to jet down there as quickly as possible. And lo and behold, it must have been a good cause, because the mascot of the university where I've been fortunate enough to work this summer greeted me at sunrise as I headed down to the canyon. I was ostentatious, so I kept my distance. I'm not sure what those bighorn sheep are like, if they're friendly or foe, but it was beautiful to see them from a distance, and the canyon itself was amazing. A great aspect of geology exposure, and a free climb up of one of the canyon waterfalls with a nice vista into the canyon after a long morning's hike. It was a beautiful day. And the weekends are quick here, so I headed back and stopped through Great Sand Dunes National Park on my way back. Having never seen dunes to this scale, or really dunes at all, other than in a sandbox some 25 years ago, this was an amazing, nearly tearjerker if I had drank enough water, sight. Time was so limited at that point of the day and storms were blowing in that I sprinted up the dunes, and absolutely breathless at the peak. The winds picked up. It was like being in a giant sandblaster, and I loved every second of it. And then just as the rain started to sprinkle down, sprinting down the dunes was about as ecstatic as I've been in a long time. That is a very fun activity, and not too painful if you tumble either, but a beautiful go about on my way back. And just as I got to the car, the skies leapt forth in a deluge to cool down the hot desert heat. It was a beautiful, beautiful park. So back to a bit more work. This is kind of objective 3 with the ground control points here, and the premise or the idea being that connecting the world coordinates with the camera pixel coordinates enables that conversation of data between the two, where you can take, topographic contours and project them onto the camera. You could take remotely sensed data grids for pixels, as I've shown in the previous images, and apply them to the camera image to kind of give an idea of like, oh, well, maybe we might need to move the phenocamera to the left so we can fully encompass this MODIS pixel to get a better relationship pad. And so that intent was kind of had here in this depiction image. And several occasions, and one more furthering, later this week I'm going to be able to get some ground control points at another site, the Aero site, the phenocamera network site that's there. But one of the first ones they did was the UVB department here at CSU has a camera out in the Pawnee Prairie lands that mentioned for that North Central retreat earlier on in the presentation. And this fellow Scott Simpson, who works at the UVB lab, took the time and was kind enough to help me get a ground control point set for there in the process of reprogramming the camera and reinstalling it on the site. And also someone at the UVB laboratory that was very helpful in getting this initiated and started with getting these data points, and then hopefully in the further process of calculating and projecting this relationship between oblique and ortho images. His name is Aveen Song, very friendly fellow and very intelligent man, and he was very helpful in trying to get some ideas and kind of seed some curiosity in me to hopefully take this project further, if not involuntary, but through future work or for future interns, hopefully. And here's another site, and I just did this a little while ago, and it's a bit crude to say the least, but an example of what might be had. Those are some of the MODIS pixels and Landsat pixels overlaid over the phenocam image at the left of the QuickBird site north of Rock Springs, Wyoming. And here, Daniel Garagas helped me get a set of ground control points at that QuickBird site to add to the UVB site at the Pawnee Prairie Lands for a data set for future work. And then the Tetons site, once that camera was installed at that site, we also took the time to gather a data set for there as well. And late last night, it took the interest to go ahead and see what it would look like to apply those data points onto a map. And on the left-hand side, you can get a depiction of where those data points plot out based off of their values. So it's kind of the beginning turning of the cogs of getting the process going, making sure how we were doing it, the process is proper, or that it will actually end up working in the end. So it's really interesting to see where the data plan's laid out with respect to the sensitivity of the footprint creation. And with respect to the farther up left outlier, it's reasonably appropriated to the image. You can see, just for example, the first three, we're using the foreground points I, J, and A. You can get approximation of those first 3 points in the front of the region of interest, and then the back 5. If you look on the back of the terrain of the image near that bridge line of the prairie land and where the mountain starts to lift up, the G, F, E, M, and C follow that spread of lines quite well. So it's interesting to see where that might go, and seeing this step is successful. And objective 4, coming into the fruition of things, was getting documents to make all the experiences and processes and analyses available so that others can jump right in and take things even further. More of a foundation than a standalone entity. And in that regard, the hope is to, over the next couple weeks, clean these up some more, make them available, and then also implore comments and critiques to improve them from members of the phenocam community, members who seek access to them, and make them additions to the entirety of the phenocam process for others to bring in and add more sites and gather more science. And so as I glimpsed my last sunset, heading back from the Dunes Park over the Rocky Mountains, probably my last sunset over the Rocky Mountains this summer, I got reminded by how fortunate living and working in this area is, and thus I got to give highest regard and respect and thanks to all the people listed here on this slide, and frankly many more that might have been unspoken. But I really am highly, from the depths of my heart, appreciative for everybody that's made this summer whole for me. So thank you.
Well, that was fantastic. I'd seen the work, so I kind of was familiar with what we were doing. Hopefully a few others enjoyed it. I think we have about 15 minutes for question and answers, especially kind of people like AmericaView or USGS or phenocam folks. Any comments? And as Joe mentioned, the idea is that we'll build on this. I think the careful documentation of those algorithms would hopefully lead us to think about how to do that footprint analysis for every camera. It's generalizable. You got an elevational model and locations. You can kind of crank it out. Not exactly fully automated, but a couple of steps and well documented to do that. And then I think turning it into what AmericaView or CEOS could do in that comparison of phenocam data to satellite observations, and then phenology extracted from the satellite observations to land surface phenology. So let me just open it up for questions in general of Joe's work or kind of the next steps.
First of all, this is Bobby, and when this project was described, you know, at the outset, you know, I was delighted, and Joe, you proved that my delight was well invested, because that's exactly what I've been asking for from an AmericaView standpoint, is that we understand more about the actual position of the cameras so that we can do some of that comparative analysis. And so your work is invaluable this summer, and I want to thank you.
That means a lot to me, Bobby. Thank you.
This is Miguel Roman at NASA. I was very fascinated by the layout. It's the first time, and I've been looking at the validation of phenology products for MODIS for, well, ever since I was Jeff Morris's grad student, so quite a while back. And it's the kind of thing that, you know, our folks at Harvard had began for a while, but they were never able to actually get it right in terms of the scaling factor. How do you relate a point to a pixel? And so that goes at the core of the work that you show here, and it's really awesome. I do want to also make note of the fact that we will be generating phenology products into the 2030s with the VIIRS instrument. So this is an area that, as Jeff has pointed out, it's very critical for us to establish the accuracy of this product, given that this is such an essential variable for climate change assessment. And there are hopefully about 25 global sites for flux measurements that LPV is looking into. The listing will be done sometime in 2015, and I really hope to see some kind of this methodology implemented as part of the protocol for phenology in the short term, because we're really going to need to get that protocol going, or otherwise all the space agencies will be measuring things differently. And we've tried to see whether we can provide a more consistent method like this one. So anyways, great job.
Thank you.
It'll be interesting. I think we need to strategize outside of Joe's work, but where the USGS and AmericaView is going with that contribution to the Committee on Earth Observing Satellites. This is, I think, a strong algorithm and protocol, and now think about doing these at the U.S. sites, and then it's the Land Product Validation Group that Miguel is going to chair on that international committee. I think that this work standardizes that, at least to some degree, the documentation, and so it'll be great to work with Miguel to make sure this is codified and then brought to the Committee on Earth Observing Satellites. So Miguel, let's stay in touch on doing that, and then kind of figure USGS and Joe, as he's a student, but and able, and then think about, I think working with John Dwyer or others at USGS to see if that's an appropriate thing that USGS would be able to invest in a bit through possibly the AmericaView program, and to make sure they kind of have a seat at the table with the Committee on Earth Observing Satellites and that land product validation subgroup.
Yes, agreed. And again, a key part of this is as the Landsat record continues to extend and it improves by fusing it with MODIS and other sensors that provide more temporal frequency, we're going to need to go back to the scaling as a way to improve those algorithms and to compare different algorithms in the same way Joe did by looking at the different VIs. You're going to have a lot of variation, and you can use the camera to evaluate the different algorithms on site. So that's a major component of the framework that has been done, but the missing piece that we've had so far has been the scaling. And that's the part that, it's the big thing of this that as a takeaway that I like a lot.
And Joe, could you back up to the slide that shows the 3 ROIs on any of the, so this, I think what's interesting is a lot of what the phenocam network has done has sort of put a rectangular AOI on the red area, the image on the left, and then sort of looked at that. But you
Yes.
see with the pixel analysis on the right-hand side image, maybe we want to look at that orange area. And sure, there's more of a bidirectional effect and you're off nadir, but yet, I think if we're going to compare to satellite data, now we're almost covering a MODIS pixel. We've got a dozen or so fully covered Landsat pixels. So, what is the better area to evaluate from the phenocam image? I think this analysis points to at least considering that orange area or even the yellowish, kind of greenish in the background, and that's where I think like America View can go, Bobby, as far as maybe that's the next step is to look at, actually do that time series that Joe was able to kind of venture into to kind of prove the concept, but to look at phenocam analysis, not just sort of like, oh, this is the stuff we see right by the camera and the flux tower, which makes a lot of sense, but but maybe these other region of interest as well, comparing those to satellite. And I think another thing that we didn't get to, but the flux community could add to the flux tower, and I think NEON's done a lot of this with every one of their towers, is it's a wind speed topography analysis of what's the vegetation influencing the CO2 flux at that tower. So you get a footprint that could changes. It's quite a bit different than this. It's not just geometric with respect to your view, but rather wind-driven of the slope and where the wind is blowing that carbon exchange over the landscape. But that's another type of thing we could fold into this analysis and think about, that flux draw or that flux catch footprint. So that's just kind of thrown out to the broader folks that we need to, that's another step. Maybe next summer, Joe, you can come in and do that.
Sounds extremely interesting, actually.
I think those are all over.
This is Diane Dubinsky. I just want to say thanks to everybody for helping make this whole project possible, because it's been really exciting to see what Joe could pull together, but also think about the data on the ground that we have from these long-term research sites. So I'm really excited about the future potential. And Jeff, I look forward to talking to you next week. And Miguel, hi, and let's talk some more sometime soon.
Great.
Yeah, great. We'll see you at ESA.
Hi, Jody. It's Vincent from UAV program, and you did a great job during this summer. And I just want to suggest in the future, if you want to continue these kinds of job, you can. I would like to suggest you some further or detail or new method or algorithm, or even for the coding, maybe it may be more benefit for you or for the program.
Thank you, Sabine.
You're welcome. If you need any help, just let me know from my side.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, any more questions before we close out? And any final comments, Geneva, as the instigator to get all this moving pieces together?
I'll just say thank you all again, and I did neglect to say that even though Joe is finishing up, he's leaving shortly after this talk. He's going to be heading north and then east to the phenocam at the Aeros Science Center, and then driving south and east and meeting Diane at the Mount Air, Iowa phenocam for installation there. Then he's heading back to Illinois, but I've been very grateful. I extended his time, so we have a few more days that he'll be still employed by USGS, where we'll be wrapping up and finalizing some of the documentation. And thanks, everybody, and thank you especially, Joe, and have very safe travels, and don't forget to text me when you get to different places to keep me posted.
I will do. And can I add one short bit to anyone that's still on the call? Even though my employment ends, the amount of time that I've dedicated to some of this data that inadvertently will be published and made available, I also, from here on thereafter, like if anyone wants to contact me or communicate with me, I'd love to discuss some of the time that I spent this summer. So I'd be happy to keep in touch with you during employment or thereon thereafter.
I mean, I really hope we'll see this through to maybe some publication to document that phenocam analysis and include Joe, obviously, as a, if not lead, a co-author. so we'll stay in touch that way and try to get this stuff documented. But with that, I think Joe's actually going to head out to South Dakota in momentarily. Thanks to everyone for joining. We'll have this recorded and Joe's slides available. We just did a screen grab of who's on the call, so I can communicate with everybody to let them know that it's out there. And then stay in touch. I think especially it's kind of the USGS sponsorship of AmericaView and the Committee on Earth Observing Satellites, land product validation, thinking about this as validating these essential climate variables of phenology and kind of where we can go with that. So thanks everybody for joining, and thanks Joe again for a great summer. I think it's been extremely productive. So.
I'm smiling really big right now.
All right.
Well, take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.